that being the, are you guys the voice of record in this small town, or do you get criticized as being one side or the other? Do you feel like the role of the paper, do people understand it and respect it?
Yeah, yeah, I do. Of course we get criticized, as being in one camp or the other. And that's always been the case in the whole time that I've been in newspaper journalism. And that's okay. I think it's a human nature to come to that conclusion when you're in one mindset or the other, and if your thought is being challenged by the newspaper, or a piece in the newspaper, you want to respond. You want to come back and say you're wrong. You're just assuming something that's not really what I think is right. So I understand that, but I do think that at the bottom line, there's a good group of people that rely on us to say, here's what we found out. You be the judge about it, but here's what we found out. We spent a little more time with this situation than just what happened on Thursday afternoon. We were looking at it again on Wednesday, and the following week we've been looking at this for 4 or 5 days, and now here's what we found out. So I think people do that. And I realize the the visual part of a newspaper has certainly taken some hits in the last decade because of the whole different variety of platforms that are out there. But still, I think in whatever form they're getting to the newspaper, that they look to that to kind of settle the score a little bit.
How did you guys decide what to focus on for the editions the last couple of days with Trump in town and the election and the primary day?
Well, I know that our thought was certainly that there are so many people inclined to not only be at that Trump rally, but also to weigh in at the polls, that we had an obligation to make sure that they didn't just hear about the hoopla, but they also heard about what he said, what his opponents have already said about him, and what some of the people that were either protesting or participating at the rally thought about it. So that there's a full menu, a full digest. It's the marketplace of thoughts, and that everybody had a chance to weigh in. And I think if you would read through the editions that we had leading up to the primary, that there's a lot of variety of thought in there. There's certainly a lot of people who were very strident about Trump being an answer to the problems in the country. But there's also a lot of comments challenging that thought, and also you get to weigh your own conclusions based on what you either saw in the photographs or in the words in the stories that were printed, in our online presence, some of the videos that were there, and I think people did that. I don't think people went into the polls here blind. There certainly are people that make that quick decision and go in and they've already decided, and that's all that goes into it. But I do think people here gave some thought to this, really gave some thought to it.
Okay. Just get a couple more, and then we'll set you loose.
Track down truants.
Okay, we're up.
I'm to get back to the campaign questions. I mean, what do you think about how the Clinton campaign represented itself in the state, in the county?
She has a...
Who did? And just give us kind of Clinton, just as we kick it off.
Okay. Secretary Clinton has a strong presence here, a good following. Again, she 8 years ago, her vote total here was the largest by any presidential candidate ever in a local primary. She had 16,000 votes. That's not forgotten. Now, she didn't come close to that this time, but I think there's a little bit of a difference involved this time. There wasn't a dynamic Republican candidate running then that diverted attention, and that certainly played a role not only on both Sanders and Clinton, but other local candidates. I mean, that was a bit of a siphon from voting that would occur normally within the Democratic Party because of the crossover vote by Republicans. And so that had an effect on her, I think. A lot of those people that went from, I'm not saying the Trump voters were likely Hillary voters in the past, but that segment certainly pulled away the potential of if you were in 2008, those folks may not have been voting for John McCain, and that may not have been a dilemma for them to try to think, should I vote for John McCain or Mike Huckabee? The folks who voted for Trump may not have been in that camp. There may actually have been some people who, in 2008, would have voted for either Hillary or President Obama. So she may have lost something there.
But what about just sort of making a presence? I mean, did you feel like there was a presence from a campaign here or any of the other campaigns?
I thought it was a missed opportunity to not come here. I was kind of a little bit surprised that she focused on the larger metros in a little bit of a way, because I think she normally would do well there, and that wouldn't necessarily be something she'd have to work real hard at, in Marion County and up in the northern part of the state. I think she could have easily done well there with 1 or 2 visits, and then sprinkled it around with places like Terre Haute and even smaller spots, Sullivan, Rockville. Come to a very small town and see what you do. But that didn't happen. That may be rethought in the coming months. I know all those campaigns have to make a big decision about where they're going to put their money, where they're going to go, what they're going to do, who's their best target, and maybe we just didn't fall into that category this time. I did, in terms of local folks, I think that probably had a bit of an impact. She could still do very well in the fall here. No guarantees, but she could still do very well here in the fall.
What about Cruz?
Cruz did himself some good by coming here. He was just not going to win.
Just they talked about.
Yeah, Cruz did himself some good by coming here and making an appearance at Woodrow Wilson a week before the election, but he just wasn't going to win here. That even if that had been the grandest political speech ever, he just wasn't going to win here in the Republican voters. They were already determined to vote for Trump. And I think that would have been close to the same numbers, maybe not as many, but close to the same numbers if Trump hadn't come here. I think they were already decided.
Surprising with the high level of evangelical participation here.
That went to Trump.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a surprise. I don't know how that squares. That's a little tough to say. Yeah, I get that.
Can we start this with? We don't know. We're not going to hear his question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can we start with something that talks about the old?
So just the makeup, in terms of having, it's partially it's not just Rust Belt and Corn Belt, it's also Bible Belt here.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand how the evangelical people who would call themselves the evangelical voters would see Trump as a good fit. So I don't know how that mindset settled on that. If there were that many people that really felt that they could still feel that they were voting as a matter of spiritual conscience, and able to do that with Trump. I don't know how that squares. Now, they may have been largely the number of people that voted for Ted Cruz. That may have been a lot of Cruz's votes here. I mean, he had more than 3,000, so they may have been well represented within that group of Cruz voters. And I know a lot of evangelical folks that I know did vote for Ted Cruz and wanted him to win, and were very solid in supporting him. So I don't know how many of the folks from that group actually made the call for Trump or not. Not as many as I think we might suspect elsewhere. I think the largest group of evangelicals here probably voted for Ted Cruz. That's my suspicion.
It's not the most ergonomically sensible camera you'll ever see again.
And how about the labor contingent here? I mean, Terre Haute still has certainly has a strong reputation and a legacy of that. To what extent do you think labor played a role in the primary?
That's a very present part of the Terre Haute community. That's, a lot of people talk about how much, unions had faded, and that's real, that's true, but here it's a bit of a legacy, and the mindset doesn't slip away. I mean, the trade unions here are very active and strong. They're part of the Chamber of Commerce here. So they still have a strong following. The Labor Day parades here are still attended. They're not gigantic, but there's people passionate about that. So they participated. Now, I talked to a lot of people who are from that camp who voted for Bernie Sanders. And again, he got 7,000 plus votes here, just 1,000 or so shy of Trump. So as we continue to, in our brains, think of this Trump phenomenon, I still think it's a bit overblown. You still have to weigh that very solidly. I mean, you put together the votes that Senator Sanders and Secretary Clinton got, and it's quite a few more than Trump did. Now now the two Republican camps and the Democrat camps here were very close this time, which is not usually the case. Usually there are a lot more Democratic voters out in the primary, and so those numbers were about the same, 13,000 plus for both Republicans and Democrats. But Trump lost those votes to about almost 4,000 of them to Ted Cruz, and that's a significant portion of a phenomenal victory. I think a phenomenal victory would have been much more overwhelming here, and he also had to rely on a lot of crossover Democratic votes. Well, that'll be different in the fall. That won't be the same way. We'll see how that goes. He may be on his way to a big victory, but I think there's definitely a little more hoopla involved in his outcomes than meets reality's eye, I think.
And being a bellwether in the general, bellwether in the primary. Yes for one, no for the other. What's the story on the primary bellwether status here?
We are not the primary bellwether at all. We are all over the map in that. More often than not, the person that gets the most votes in the primary here, Republican or Democrat, does not end up becoming the president, or as our status has given us, the winner in Vigo County either. So that's certainly not a guarantee that because Donald Trump got 8,000 votes in the primary and the two closest candidates were behind him, that he will win in the fall. We change our minds. We have more voters show up. A lot of people here and elsewhere in Indiana don't like the idea of having to say, I want a Democrat ballot or I want a Republican ballot, and they simply just don't vote in the primary because of that. And they'll be back out. The regular voters will be back out in the fall. You'll also get more voters who we have a arcane and hugely outdated requirement here that people register to vote a month before the deadline. Well, more people stay attuned to that in the fall than they do in the spring. There are a lot of voters here that probably got interested in the election here in the last few weeks and simply just hadn't registered and couldn't do it. And it's a bad law. It needs to be changed. And you know, in the fall, a lot more people overcome that and actually find out that, yes, I need to register by, you know, the first week in October, and then get ready, and they do, at least in greater numbers than they do in the spring. So yeah, I think our bellwether in the spring is non-existent. Our bellwether in the fall is when it really happens.
And just tell me a little about that pulling a ballot, picking a ballot. How does that work? And is that Vigo only, or that's across the state?
It's throughout Indiana. You go into the polling place, and they say, do you want a Democrat ballot or a Republican ballot? And you know, you pick one, and so you tell that to the poll person with people in line behind you, probably people you know sometimes at the polling desk. So you know, it's a revelation that a lot of people are not willing to make. They feel like a ballot should be a private choice. If they want to talk about it, fine, but they shouldn't have to declare that in front of, you know, a room full of public representatives. So that's a bit off-putting for some people, and they just don't vote in the primary because of that. So the numbers will be larger in the fall, guaranteed.
How do you think, how you feeling about looking forward to another 6-7 months of this? Not over yet.
Yeah, it's definitely not over. You know, it is certainly tempting to just roll your eyes and feel exhausted by it, and there's definitely a level of that. You get exasperated by it. You know, you want to take a fast from anything political for X amount of time, but it also is a fantastic representation of what the American democracy is all about, and it's totally intriguing. I love watching it happen. It's exhausting for sure, but I'll be fascinated to see how it all turns out. I'm always impressed that Americans really beat this around enough that by the end, the candidates are, and I'm certainly testing my theory here with the present candidates, but I think by the election time, they're a little bit humbled by all of this and changed in a way that is a positive thing, that they realize that there's a big country out there, that there's a lot of different people that they're looking at, that they can't look at Americans in one monolithic mind, and that they need to serve a whole lot of people and not just their own specific support groups and base.
That's okay. I have one more when you're done.
Go for it.
Yeah? Well, it should be the last one, so let me know when you're done.
Oh, I was just going to say, wonder how, you know, you're saying feeling served. I mean, to the extent that people here are feeling that the system or the government is serving them. I mean, you may not want to say, but that's like a pretty big statement.
Do the people here feel like they're being served by the government?
Yeah, do they feel like it's working for them?
Probably. I mean, probably not. I mean, there's a.
Probably not what?
They're probably feeling, there's a good group of people, and certainly you hear it in their intentions when they're voting, that they don't feel like the government is serving them as it should be. But that's not uncommon in any election. It really isn't. And I, you know, in looking back at some past election results through our archives, you hear many of those same things, I have to get back to that idea that this Trump phenomenon may not be that phenomenal. It's just part of what happens in the course of our political democracy. I looked at headlines from 1976, 1964, 1988 that were people talking about, I'm going to vote for a change. Things need to change. We need to shake things up. We need somebody that's willing to not be a career politician and this and that, and so those are the same things that we're hearing now. It's not that unusual. It's just a different person, and he's the representative of that particular thought pattern. But he's not the only one. If you want to characterize Bernie Sanders as an outsider, you could. He's certainly not part of the Washington elite. He's a senator, but you know what? He's not one of the club there for sure. So you're probably pinning too large of a mantle on what's happening this time to say it's really off the charts. I don't buy that.
I got one more.
You got one?
Yeah. And again, Don is asking this. Did you have trouble making up your own mind in this primary?
Well, I hope I do. I hope I always do.
Hope you do what?
I hope I always have a hard time choosing, making my final choice in voting, because I take a little time with it and look through all the candidates. And I have to say that I don't, I certainly, while the attention here is focused around our presidential vote, I have much more concern about how I vote down the ballot than the top of that ticket, because I guarantee you we feel that as closely as decisions made on the federal level here. I mean, the state government has a much more direct role in what we do here in Indiana, the local government as well. So those choices to me are every bit as important as the one at the top. I understand the impact of that office. I understand that the presidency is certainly it's the most important position on the planet, as far as our structure of civilization goes. But there's a lot of impact felt here by who our governor is, by who our state legislators are, by who our county officials are, the mayor, the city council. Those are things that we really feel, and so I took a long time to think about those two. And for me, that's all part of one process. I don't want to shortchange the importance of people taking a lot of time to vote all the way up and down their ballot.
Are you comfortable with your choice for president?
Yeah, I am. I'd like to keep that to me.
Great. So when you said you looked at past headlines and stuff, is that all